Hello and welcome back to another State of the Faction video. Yes, this is the HeirofCarthage, and I am excited today because we are going to take a look at the Dark Elves, or the Druchii. Really cool faction in the Total War universe, albeit very brutal, and not a faction where I would want to actually live in their universe because it would be absolutely horrific. But an interesting faction in terms of the game and giving you something different to play. Yes, I think it was back in July, we got our first look at Malekith and Morathi, or Malekith and Momrathi, as I like to call them. Malekith and Morathi were really interesting juxtapositions to Tyrion and Teclis, who were supposed to be out there restoring this great and beautiful order. And then these two were just power-hungry, murderous weirdos who were trying to lay waste to all of it because Malekith thought that he was the Phoenix King, and I guess technically he was, though, at one point. Anyway, whatever. So he has this ongoing feud with the High Elves, and of course, being very Slaneshi in their ways, the Dark Elves love all kinds of, well, let's say less than scrupulous activities here. So they are very interesting in the terms that they are like the polar opposite of the High Elves. However, not all of their gameplay and infantry or anything are polar opposite. Whereas the High Elves are more defensive focused, the Dark Elves are more offensively focused. So they are opposite in that regards, but both of them have excellent rosters that are pretty well diversified. It's just that the Dark Elves are a little bit more focused on damage. And of course, they focus around dark magic, where the High Elves focused around high magic initially where they came out. But a great faction, a lot of fun. Like I said, a very varied roster. They have a lot of different lords and start positions. And they were a really fun addition into the world of Total War Warhammer, right? I know that they've been part of Warhammer for a long time, but to see them added in Total War was neat. And at this point, we had all three races of elves that were going to be in the game, and it was going to be fun. Anyway, so let's go take a look at the Dark Elves. How do they stack up? Do they have enough lords? Do they have enough unique starts? Do they have enough unique mechanics? And is their roster ready to take on what's obviously going to be very powerful factions in Game 3? All right, folks, it is Druchii Day. Now, I know I said in the previous video that the High Elves are kind of favorites of mine, and they are, aesthetically speaking. I just really like the look of their units, their territory, and all that other kind of stuff. But the Dark Elves have always been amongst my favorite factions. Number one, because I feel like I play the best as them in multiplayer, even though I guess a lot of people don't consider them to be top tier in multiplayer, though I'm sure they're pretty close. But yeah, I've always liked them in multiplayer because they have a good rounded roster. And in campaign, holy crap, if you are looking for a campaign challenge, pick Morathi. Set it to very hard, or legendary, and just buckle up, Buttercup, because you're about to get face slapped by every challenge you can imagine. It is nuts. Some of the craziest battles I've ever had from that campaign. But anyway, yeah, Malekith and Morathi, son and mother, made up the original two characters. And like the other base factions in this game, the Druchii have 6 legendary lords, so they're on equal footing. And there are 6 unique starts. I could go through, I guess I'll go through them real quick. Malekith gets Nagarond. Morathi starts near Titan Peaks. Chrone Hellebron starts here in a slightly, I think it's a little bit east of Nagarond, where she starts. And then you've got Lokir, who starts down towards Lustria. Malice, who starts way off in the Dragon Isles, just south of the Shadowlands. And then you've got Rakharth, who has an Albion start, which is really interesting. So you do have 6 different lords. You got 6 different starts. And just quickly, what makes these... these lords are different. I don't want to just sit here and read to you everything they're focused on, because honestly, that's a little boring and probably just waste time. Malekith and Morathi are excellent spellcasters. I think Morathi is the best overall lord for the Druchii, and that's not to say that the rest of them aren't good, because they certainly are. They have benefits, but to me, I like Morathi the most just for her playstyle and her ability to just pump out tons of terrible magic, and I love the debuff aura that she has around her. Makes for a very fun playstyle with her. Malekith is probably the one you want to go for if you're looking for good brute melee strength mixed with magic. He has a black dragon mount that is really good as well. And then Chrone Hellebron, if you're just looking to be an insane damage dealer and kind of go ham on, attacking and enslaving all the other factions you run into, then she's a good pick. Lokir gives you that Corsair feel. You can really focus on Black Ark Corsairs and other Corsair units, and then, of course, using the Black Arks and your naval power to your advantage. And so he kind of feels like a mixture of Druchii and Vampire Coast, honestly. Then you get Malice Darkblade, who unfortunately just really isn't that unique, in my opinion. He does transform, which is different, and when he turns into Zarkon, he is pretty powerful, but it's a questionable decision to make because he dies after enough time as Zarkon. So if you like having your Legendary Lord wounded a ton, then you need to be careful with that. And his buffs go to Heavy Cavalry, and Heavy Cavalry is useless at the minute that you turn the difficulty up beyond normal in battle, because the debuffs and stuff or the buffs that the AI get just make Heavy Cavalry utterly useless. And some of these units are kind of useless anyway for the Druchii in terms of efficiency anyway. So I think Malekith gets a little bit left in the dust, were it not for his fairly unique start position, which is kind of a fun start position over in the Dragon Isle. So he has that, in my opinion, as a slightly redeeming factor there. Then we got Rakharth. Rakharth was a really cool addition. It made your Druchii army suddenly kind of feel like a mix with the Beastmen in a sort of way, right? As you had all these creatures that he can force into the service of his army, and it's really neat and adds more units and more fun ways to fight as the Druchii. So Rakharth was a really cool add. Plus his start position on Albion is really fun. You got access to the old world and the new. Lots of targets within range. It's going to be a good time for sure. So anyway, that's kind of how these guys play out. Again, they all have unique start positions in Mortal Empires and unique abilities and things that make them acceptable for sure. I say acceptable because mostly because of Malice, because he's just not that exciting. But in any case, here we are in the Vortex. All 6 start in the Vortex as well. So no big surprise there. It was the same with the High Elves. All right, now let's load up a campaign with each and take a look at their mechanics and see how each of these lords stacks up in terms of fun and unique campaign mechanics. All right, so here we are with Malekith. We've loaded up. He starts at Nagaron, as I mentioned. Slaves are basically the currency for the Druchii, and it's because they're brutal jerks, and that's just kind of how they work in their lore. And so whenever they fight other factions, of course, they slaughter and kill because they're a bunch of Slaaneshi weirdos. And they also like taking slaves and torturing and just being awful in general. That's just kind of what the Druchii do. And so that's like their special faction currency here. And it's because you use them to fuel extra economic buffs. You can keep track of it here in this detailed like slave market type thing. And then of course, on top of that, when you look at their rights and rituals and stuff that they can do, most of them cost a certain number of slaves. Of course, because you're an evil dark elf and you're going to sacrifice these poor captives that you have to get to your means. So that's kind of the special mechanic that the Druchii have, and it's not bad, right? It has economic buffs. It also plays into your rites and rituals, which can be quite powerful. And so, yeah, it's not bad. It's not amazing, right? Later into the development of this game, we expected more when you got a Lord, but this isn't terrible. And if we look at everything else that says Black Arcs, we're familiar with Black Arcs, but you can see it's a little bit basic with Malekith, much like it was with Tyrion and Teclis. Let's move on to Morathi and check the same. All right, now we got the Cult of Pleasure, and you can see the only difference here is this Chaos Corruption. It says the depraved nature of Morathi and her Cult of Pleasure spreads chaos corruption wherever they settle. So, I mean, that just is what it is. So everywhere you go, it's going to be spreading chaos corruption on the map, and any good or ill that comes of it, that comes with it. So her start, though, Ancient City, nothing really different otherwise about the way she plays. So nothing really special to cover here beyond that in terms of mechanics for the Cult of Pleasure. All right, so Chrone Hellebron. Let's take a look at the differences. She still has, obviously, the slaves. She came in at the same time the Sword of Cain did, so she's got those same things going on. You can see the slave counts here, but of course hers gets a little more complex, as was typical at this point in development for Warhammer 2. She also has this Death Knight thing going on, and we can see that going on up here. It says you can trigger the Death Knight. So once you've gathered enough slaves, you can trigger it, and essentially it says the streets of Hargoneth are bathed in blood, rejuvenating its queen, granting her untold powers without regular Death Knights, where the slave pits are open to commit murder. Hellebron's strength and power will dramatically weaken. So basically you have to keep taking in the slaves, and you have to keep sacrificing them on these Death Knights, or else she'll lose power. The Blood Voyage, it says, holding a Death Knight inspires the Druchii to bear arms and undertake a murderous journey. Aiding this army on its quest for blood will enable you to reap the battle reward. So essentially, it spawns up these Blood Voyage armies that will sail over to Ulthuan and go full suicide. And of course, if you follow behind them, they can help create openings for you with their large numbers. So, and then we got the Sword of Cain, which we discussed yesterday. It's the same for the Druchii. So that's Chrone Hellebron. A little more complex and good to see because, again, she came out a little later. Okay, so for Lokir Felheart, which kind of a fun lord here. We'll talk about his statistics, like in terms of combat prowess later, but his start here is with Chupayadol or whatever, however you say that. I couldn't begin to pronounce this type of stuff right. He does have a black arc where he starts as well, and then here's Lokir as well. So this is him. You can see there's nothing special up here like Chrone Hellebron. Now remember, he was a free LC unit. It says, unlike others among his Dark Elf kin, Lokir may summon a mighty black arc after occupying a major port. As more are acquired, the number of black arcs available for recruitment will increase accordingly. These powerful floating fortresses can be used to attack enemy ports, raise armies, recruit units, support invasion forces with aerial bombardments, and so on. He still has, rights and slaves and all that stuff. So his benefit is that every time he snags a port, he gets another black arc. Black arcs are very powerful when they get leveled up. You can recruit from them, and that is massively helpful. And then they can basically give huge naval bombardments, especially after you upgrade those abilities through the buildings on the Black Arc. So they're actually very powerful, and it makes him play a lot more like a Corsair, a little more like the Vampire Coast, but not quite, because he's not a walking, flagship like you are whenever you're playing as the Coast. So in any case, more of a Corsair feel, if that's what you're into with the Druchii, but also, not terribly impressive since he's got even less stuff, but he was a free unit, whereas Chrone Hellebron was part of a DLC, so I'm not totally surprised that he has slightly less than her. All right, so we have loaded in as Malice and playing as Hag Grief, and again, he came even later into the development period, so you can see that he's got a really cool looking setup up here on the top. So the same slave mechanic that every other Druchii faction has. However, he has to drink elixirs because he's trying to fight this, what do you call it? The possession that he has from Zarkon. And so it says, bound as one, Zarkon's possessive power constantly saps Malice's mind, manifesting itself as a powerful demonic form in battle when fully possessed. So basically, the longer he's possessed, the stronger he becomes in melee. However, it starts to have lots of really bad side effects. So you can see here, full possession at 10, and the ability to transform into Zarkon comes into play, but it ruins your ability to replenish. And honestly, I hate this mechanic, and it makes Malice a real tedium to play. It's like, you want to use his Zarkon ability because it's fun, but if you want to use it, you basically can't replenish an army. Like, you have to constantly have like another stack following him with units you can bring in and then merge with your own. It's really kind of irritating, and you can't ever get rid of the elixirs until you, I think you have to like confederate with Malekith or something like that. I mean, it's crazy what you have to do to get rid of the elixirs. It's a lot of work. I mean, so personally, it's made his campaign not very enjoyable for me, even though it has an interesting start. I'm not a fan of this. I get where they were going, and it could certainly be neat. But, I mean, I just don't think this was well executed, and it probably should have been patched. By the way, the elixirs just get more and more expensive, too. So then you got to deal with the fact that CA is basically forcing you, like, if you want to replenish your army, get ready to cough up all your money. What other faction gets this? And remember, this is supposed to be a unique ability for your faction that's supposed to be fun and entertaining and powerful, but in fact, it's just draining your coffers and making it where you can't replenish an army. If I've missed something major, you all can let me know. Like, maybe there's some secret to the way that he actually is supposed to play and I just don't get it. But yeah, that's Malice. Not very interesting and not a good mechanic in my opinion. And here we are loaded in with Rakharth, and Rakharth as a free LC unit actually kind of shows you how to do it right versus what we saw with Malice. Now again, nothing complicated up here. Rakharth, it's just, just same old slave mechanic. However, he has monster pins, And it says his forces can capture various beasts and monsters for the monster pin to instantly recruit into your army. Creatures are captured by winning battles under certain conditions or at settlements owned by specific races, as well as by raiding specific climates. High-level characters have a higher chance of capturing these creatures. So basically, the higher rank you get, the more likely you are to capture things, and of course, that all depends on what you're going up against. It's nothing you're going to see up here, but it's found whenever you click your army. With Rakharth here, you can see all the different monsters you can recruit, and this kind of becomes a really fun Pokemon game to see if you can collect them all. So it tells you how to get them. You know, like for instance, it says, cannot recruit this unit. It can be replenished by occupying, sacking, or raising high elf or wood elf settlements. And then to get the Charybdis, winning battles at sea, to get a war Hydra, raiding mountain regions. You know, the feral connoisseur, go after the lizardmen, basically. You get a mammoth, go after Norska. Blood Rack Medusa, special events only. Stegodons, you know, so again, really kind of fun because it gives you these little missions and objectives to go do. You can pick which ones you want to do, or you don't have to do any of it if you don't want to. But he gets an interesting start here in Albion, and Rakharth himself, being kind of an anti-large character, is really quite fun and unique, and I think makes him, you know, a really great pick for the Druchii, and unlike Malice, is very fun and enjoyable. So anyway, that's a rundown of all the campaign positions and their mechanics. You all can see what you think. Personally, I think most of the Dark Elves are in at least acceptable shape. I think Malice needs to be reworked. Again, if I'm wrong and you all have figured out how Malice works and you think Heir is being totally unfair, please go in the comments and say so people can read it, see what you think. That's just my opinion on where he's at. I don't get it, and I don't think it's fun. However, Malekith and Marathi, while being a little bland compared to the others, they do offer some pretty immense capability as legendary lords on the battlefield. And so they kind of make up for the fact that they have slightly outdated mechanics. It would be nice to see something added to them, and it would be nice to see Malice tweaked. Other than that, honestly, the Dark Elves are in pretty decent shape as far as uniqueness and plenty of lords and start positions. All right, on to one of my favorite parts of the video, which is discussing the roster of the Dark Elves. And the Dark Elves have a very fun roster, in my opinion. Some people in the multiplayer community, at least towards the end of the game, I remember thinking that they were basically saying that the Dark Elves weren't what they used to be. I don't play enough competitive multiplayer to really know much about that. Like, I'm not into the tournament scene and stuff. So if people have that experience, they can go ahead and comment on it. Personally, though, I think the Dark Elves roster is great. It's varied, it has lots of potential, and honestly, I think it's fairly easy to play, and probably a good starting point for people who are trying to learn multiplayer, at least in my opinion. And I'll go through why, and let's talk about their units now. And as far as campaign, the same goes for campaign. They've got a very capable roster for campaign as well. Now, in the infantry department, I love the Dark Elves offerings. They have everything from cheap weak swords and dread spears, which are just honestly pretty decent units for the price, especially considering they have a silver shield there. They do relatively well for their cost. They're not going to blow you away, but you have an anti-large and just a standard version infantry at a low cost, which is always good. And then you start coming in with some interesting mid-tier options between Blackheart Corsairs and Witch Elves, both of which are specifically anti-infantry. The Blackheart Corsairs, though, come in with pretty decent armor at 80. Like, if you're going up against factions that don't yet have armor-piercing capability, Blackheart Corsairs are going to own their infantry. And it's because of that bonus versus infantry they get. And then at 80 armor of their own, it makes it difficult for non-AP units to strike back. Witch Elves are a little different. They're more of a glass cannon. They're going to hit really hard, and they can potentially berserk a unit here. It says Madness of Cain. It basically rampages the unit, takes away speed and melee defense, making them more vulnerable. On top of that, they have a bonus versus infantry, and they have physical resistance to make up for their extremely low armor. And then, of course, they have this dodge ability, which I believe helps them dodge. It says they can dodge or use their blades to dodge missiles. So it gives them a little bit of help against the fact that they have no armor and no shield. So, again, interesting picks at the mid-tier for infantry as well. Then we get to the elite tier infantry, and there's some solid stuff here, too. Sisters of Slaughter are the even angrier big sisters of the Witch Elves, and these sisters hit really hard in melee. You can see here they even have really good melee defense too. They don't have any armor, as you can imagine with the way they're dressed in the unit card. But they do have physical resistance built in. They have poison attacks, which are brutal because remember, poison attacks slow down, take away weapon damage from whatever they're hitting. So it's going to make it that much more difficult for whatever's fighting the Sisters of Slaughter to fight back at them. Their melee attack is nothing special, but their weapon strength is pretty good, and they have a pretty solid charge bonus. So Sisters of Slaughter are going to absolutely waylay unarmored infantry or anything else, basically, that doesn't have armor. And they are difficult to rout. They have really good leadership, and they are difficult to get off the battlefield. You can see here that they have this augment, too, that anytime they're in melee, they get extra attack, which does drive it up to be a pretty high level, and they get some extra AP damage at the same time. Then we got the Hargoneth Executioners. One of the best armor-piercing anti-infantry units in the game. I think probably best infantry just has to go to Chosen with great weapons in terms of just pound for pound, like beating that they can dish out. But at this price point, Executioners, in my opinion, are way more worth the price. These guys hit like an absolute truck. So they are fantastic elite infantry for killing basically all other infantry on the battlefield. And there isn't much on the battlefield that they won't kill, given the opportunity. So a very fantastic unit. Then you're going to get this Blackguard unit here, and Blackguard are a really cool specific anti-large unit at the elite tier that gives the Dark Elves excellent stopping power when it comes to fighting factions who are running around with monsters and cavalry everywhere. So fantastic options across the board for the Dark Elves. Definitely good infantry options. Now, from a missile standpoint, they're not going to stack up great against the High Elves in terms of range, but don't underestimate the damage that the Druchii can do to you from range. What they lack in range, they make up for in AP damage. Almost all of their missiles are armor-piercing, and they have some very interesting choices. Dark Shards, while not being very cheap like High Elf Archers, and again, lacking a lot of their range at only 125, but it's 23 damage, and most of it's AP. So all of a sudden, even their cheapest missile units can do tremendous damage to very expensive enemy units. The shielded variant, of course, just makes them better at skirmishing, and they last a little longer in melee. So both of these very good skirmishers, they lack range, but they have excellent hitting power. Now, one of the few Dark Elf units that does not have AP missiles is this Blackheart Corsair with hand bows, which is similar to a Blackheart Corsair in melee. Not exactly the same, but similar. They don't have that anti-infantry bonus on their melee weapon strength, but they do have a short-range missile weapon that they can use to kite. It fires in a 360-degree arc, and they can fire while moving. They're an interesting unit early in a campaign to use on the flank and really irritate an enemy army by shooting them with these small hand bows and picking away at their health. Then we move into the good stuff. Probably some of my favorite units in the entire Dark Elf roster, and I abuse the crap out of these units whenever I'm playing a high-level campaign, a high-difficulty campaign, I should say. Shades. Shades with dual weapons, and Shades with great swords. 3 variants of the same unit that has decent range at 130 and really good missile strength at 34 and most of it AP. Now, the different variants. Shades are pretty decent in melee after they've blown their ammunition. They're not amazing, but they're not bad, like against low armor. And then the Shades with dual weapons are honestly kind of good in melee after they've expended their ammunition because they have a bonus versus infantry. And then you have the Great Swords who are just excellent in melee after they've expended their ammunition. There's not a ton of them, right? They're not as numerous as an infantry unit. I think I'm on the large settings and it's showing me a size of 60. But Shades with Great Swords are insane. Like if they dump their ammunition, they'll do tremendous damage. And then when they get upgrades and stuff throughout the campaign, they are beast in melee as well. They're not going to want to get charged by cavalry, but if you're throwing them into a melee after it's kind of already been started by a main line, it is awesome what you can pull off with Shades. I love Shade units. And to me, I love the missile line of the Druchii. It's definitely one of their strengths. But of course, the Druchii have, a pretty solid ability to do almost everything. They may not be the master of everything, but they're pretty darn good at most everything they do. Now, Cavalry and Chariots, let's talk through that. Light Cavalry, Dark Riders are excellent choice. They're very similar to Illyrian Reavers. Solid charge bonus. They move around the battlefield very quickly. There's an unshielded and shielded variant. Cheap shot cavalry with Vanguard deploy. Good stuff. Then we come into the cavalry options, and you get at 1,000 gold here, the Cold One Spear Cavalry. These are good cavalry, AP anti-large. They're not amazing, right? They're not going to beat Demigryph Knights. They probably won't beat Blood Knights. But for their cost, they deal good damage. So they're not bad. So they're very cost-efficient units. Then we move on to Doomfire Warlocks, which are a very expensive light cavalry, but they're very niche as well. These get into low armor units. They can do a ton of damage, and they have bound spells, Lesser Doombolt, and Soul Blight. So again, these are going to be good against low armor scenarios, very fast moving, and they have Vanguard deploy as well, and they also come with some physical resistance, so quite a lot of it, in fact. They're very good if you're not using them against magic attack targets, and those targets don't have a ton of armor. Then we get Cold One Dread Knights. A really cool unit in theory, but just has never really proved out to be terribly valuable, in my opinion, on the battlefield. Any Cold One unit can still rampage because of the stupid Primal Instincts thing. So you can lose control of them. They're not high in number. They do pretty decent damage. Their charge bonus is very lackluster, and they're slow. So not a very impressive unit, in my opinion, and almost never worth it. Sometimes in campaign, if you just feel like it, go for it. But honestly, the Cold One Knights are probably going to be just about as good at almost everything. Obviously, you get a little more armor and survivability with the Dread Knights, but I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it. You all can tell me what you think. Missile Cavalry, the Druchii have some fun Missile Cavalry. They've got the Dark Riders with repeater crossbows that do short-range AP damage. I should say more mid-range-ish AP missile damage. Very deadly in numbers if you can keep them from being caught. Definitely something to be feared for your enemies. Scourge Runner Chariots, which do AP anti-large missile damage and then double as being good against infantry in a melee. Very handy units, I think, in like the mid to early game when there's less large things to stop them. And then we got Cold One Chariots, which are a heavy chariot, and they are going to do very well against infantry, and they also possess some decent missile capability from range, doing some nice AP damage, but a lot slower is the downside you're going to run into. Plus, they're pulled by a Cold One, so they can rampage, so you get to enjoy that. Monsters and Beast. Not a huge roster of Monsters and Beast, but a good roster of Monster and Beast here for the Dark Elves. Harpies are a quick-moving flying unit, which are great at disrupting artillery and missiles. Manticores, we've seen before. I'm not going to go into great detail. Fast, high damage, good support in numbers. They cause terror. Then we come to the War Hydra, the first unique monster here for the Dark Elves, and it's a good one. The Hydra has 2 breath attacks, which can be good against infantry blobs. You have to not be in melee to use them. And the Hydra is fantastic in a melee blob. It causes heavy AP damage. Doesn't have a ton of armor, but it regenerates while it's fighting, and even when it's not fighting. And so it can go a long ways in combat if you just don't dig it in too deep. Right? You put it in the right amount of combat, and it'll last a long time and be a nuisance. And you got the Charybdis, which is similar to the Hydra in most respects, except it's an anti-large variant that doesn't heal. Doesn't have the breath attacks either. So the Hydra is definitely meant to go more against infantry blobs. The Charybdis is specifically meant to fight large, and it's quite good at it because it uses poison attacks to slow down whatever it's attacking, and it causes tremendous AP and anti-large damage here. You can see there's a 30 bonus versus large with 350 of its weapon strength being AP. And then finally we get the Black Dragon, which is a pretty potent flying unit at 520 weapon damage. It's similar to a Star Dragon. It does have breath attacks, not quite as good as the Star Dragon, but it's pretty good. And Black Dragons are a pretty powerful addition to the roster for the Dark Elves. And then there's some special missile monsters here. It's going to be the Bloodrack Medusa, and then, of course, the Regiment of Renown version of it. Bloodrack Medusas are pretty interesting, honestly. If they get to sit back from a fight, they don't have huge range, but it causes tremendous damage to infantry blobs. And then when they get into combat, they cause terror, and they have pretty good weapon strength, albeit pretty low survivability. That's going to be your trade-off with these Bloodrack Medusas. They're going to cause pretty good damage. They're a little squishy, but if you can have them stand off from a fight for a while, they can just unload into the back of it and cause tons of damage to enemy infantry. It can be very valuable if you're going after high-level infantry. And then we get finally to the artillery and war machines, and we're going to see the Reaper Bolt Throwers, which are same as what the High Elves have. A mid-range artillery that is really good against other artillery and pretty solid against large targets, and is very affordable. So it makes the Reaper Bolt Throwers quite useful. And then you got the Bloodrack Shrine, which is similar to the Bloodrack Medusa, except it's a shrine, and it has some additional benefits here. You can see it has a leadership and attack aura, and then a debuff of enemy leadership and attack around it. It can fire whilst moving, which is handy. Again, short range, but very good against infantry. And it has a specific anti-infantry damage that it does as well, because it's kind of a magical chariot. Anyway, that is the Druchii unit roster. Now let's go back and talk about heroes. We'll start off by taking a look at the magic they have access to. The Druchii have access to sorceress heroes, and they come in the flavor of Beast, Death, Dark, Fire, and Shadow. And Dark is kind of unique to the Dark Elves. It's not totally unique to them, but it's definitely one of their hallmarks. Not a bad lore of magic. Dark magic, it can totally be usable. Fire is very good. Shadow is very good. Death is solid. Beast is good. So basically, not every lore like the High Elves have, but they got some really good stuff in terms of magic with their heroes. These sorceresses have different mount options. It can go from a dark steed, which is kind of like light cavalry-esque. It can be mounted on a cold one, which gives them AP damage. Not amazing damage, but it is AP. And then they also have the Dark Pegasus, which gives them tremendous speed to get around the battlefield. So you basically get the option of speed, a little extra damage, speed but cheaper, and then on foot, right? So all of them have the same options there. All right, now we're going to talk about the other heroes, which are all kind of melee-centric, right? More combat-centric, whereas the sorceresses are more of a magic-centric thing, obviously. You got the Master, which is an anti-large hero, and has 4 different mounts: the Dark Steed, the Cold One Chariot, and the Dark Pegasus. On foot or on the Dark Pegasus here, it's an AP anti-large unit with a shield. Very good at helping take down enemy monsters and large lords. On the Cold One, it maintains basically the same thing, just gets a little more armor. And then when you mount it on the Chariot, it does flip from being anti-large to anti-infantry. If you choose the Pegasus, it maintains the anti-large, and now this is really handy. Because remember that a flying unit charging into a unit on the ground unit has no way to countercharge. And since this is anti-large, if there are large enemy units on the ground, it makes this a particularly good pick on the Pegasus because it cannot be countercharged. It can move around the battlefield very quickly. So the Master is a good choice for support of armies. Then we got the Cainite Assassin. A less popular pick probably in multiplayer and campaign, but still a fun pick. This is a short-range, high missile strength unit that shoots poison darts essentially, and it really has pretty solid melee attack and defense capabilities, albeit low armor whenever they get into melee. A fun unit though, has some special abilities where it can get a whole lot of extra weapon damage, do a little bit of discouraging, and then has this debuff here with the Assassin's Trophy. Not a widely used unit, but interesting and kind of fun to throw in there. And then a pretty widely used unit here is the Death Hag. This is basically an anti-infantry or a blob buster tool or hero. You can bring her on foot, and she's good against infantry. You can put her in this expensive cauldron, and she's still really good against infantry. So that's essentially what she's going to do. She's going to be there to buff up your own infantry, keep them motivated, and she can debuff with this Chill Blade enemy infantry. So a nice combination with Morathi, by the way, too, because Morathi also has a lot of debuffs. So significant debuffing that the Death Hags can do when they work with Morathi. So good heroes available to the Dark Elves too. Again, not the most heroes, but pretty darn solid offering that the Dark Elves get. Now let's take a look at generic lords. You got the High Beastmaster, which is Dollar Store Rakharth as an anti-large lord. And then you've got the Dreadlord with Sword and Shield, which is just a generic Dark Elf lord. They're not necessarily a dollar store version of anybody else. They're somewhat unique. They're a decent melee offering. Good duelist with high defense and good attack, but not necessarily with any AP damage. However, a lot of mount options. Dark Steed again, Cold One, which then does go to AP damage. Dark Pegasus, and then the Black Dragon, which has the most damage. So a lot of options with the Dreadlord Sword and Shield. Then we get the Dreadlord Sword and Crossbow, which has a short range, very high damage crossbow. Same mounts, slightly different melee capabilities, though very similar. No, that's basically the same melee capabilities for the most part. A little bit lower defense, I think. Yeah, a little bit lower defense and attack. Really the main difference there, but same mounts, and again, a generic offering. And then as far as other generics go, we've got some sorceress leaders in case you want to have a spellcaster leading your army. They've got Beast, Dark, Death, Fire, and Shadows. So let's see here again. Beast, dark, death, fire, shadows. Yep, same offerings. So the same 5 offerings you get from the heroes. As far as mounts go, again, they've got access to pretty much everything except throw a Manticore in there as well, which again is fast with high damage, so lots of mount options for the sorceresses. That's your generic lords. Lots of opportunities there, honestly, so it's a pretty nice offering. Then we'll go into the legendary lords. Rakharth is a great anti-large option. We pick him here. You can see he actually has a Scourge Runner Chariot mount, which makes him uniquely good against infantry and large at the same time. Good against large from range, good against infantry and melee, and pretty quick. So it's an interesting pick. Manticore makes him quick but flying, and he maintains AP anti-large, even when on the Manticore, which is different than a typical Manticore, so it makes that unique as well. And then he Brachus, his Black Dragon here, very powerful AP anti-large. You don't usually see the anti-large combined with the AP on a dragon, so uniquely powerful dragon mount for Rakharth. Then we get Lokir. Lokir only has a dragon mount. This is Maelstrom, his dragon. He's quite powerful on it. When he's not on his dragon, he gets anti-infantry bonus, which is pretty cool, and he's a pretty solid duelist at 60 attack and defense with really good armor as well. When he goes on the dragon, he loses the specific anti-infantry, but still maintains really good capabilities, 520 damage, so Lokir is a pretty cool lord, and honestly, like, when he's on foot going up against other lords on foot, he's probably one of the most capable duelists out there, next to like Sigvald and stuff. He's quite good. Then let's move on to Chrone Hellebron, who is an interesting pick. She has a Dark Steed, a Manticore, and a Cauldron of Blood mount, and her abilities are really focused on upping the ante when it comes to damage. So she can really crank the damage up all the way from 1 to, on a scale of 1 to 10, she cranks it up to about 15 when she gets things going. You can see all of her abilities are focused on that. Her special items are, focused on it. This Cursed Blade does direct damage and an aura around her. So she is all about the damage. And she is tremendously good against infantry in her Cauldron. And she is fast and good against infantry on her Dark Steed and the Manticore. So don't underestimate her. She is really good against infantry blobs. Then you get Malice Darkblade. He's kind of almost as uninteresting in multiplayer, or say in battle, as he is on campaign. He's okay, right? He's not terrible. He's got pretty solid attack and defense, decent damage. You can mount him on a cold one, which gives him a little more damage and armor. I mean, almost nothing here in terms of abilities. And then Warp Sword of Cain does some regenerating, which is nice. But yeah, I mean, just nothing to write home about. Like, he's got his special transform where he transforms into Zarkon. Once you've picked that, he will die at some point. So, like, if you transform into Zarkon and the enemy just runs away from you, then you just get to watch your lord die on the battlefield. So, I don't know. Malice was an interesting addition to the game. I'm just not sure CA totally thought this one through, to be honest, because it doesn't work out well most of the time. Again, if you think I'm being too hard on Malice, please put your opposing opinion to mine down in the chat so that we have someone opposed to it. All right, Morathi, the best Druchii Lord. Not a ton of mount options. She does have Sulafet here, which is her special Dark Pegasus. When she's on that Pegasus, she's very quick at 105. She's AP anti-large, and she's the same on foot. She's not really intended to be this insane melee lord, but she is quite good at it. And the reason for this is, and it may surprise some of you because you look at her armor and you're like, why would she be that good at melee? She's going to get eaten alive with that armor. It's these abilities here. Enchanting Beauty is a huge debuff within 40 meters to melee attack. And then combine that with a Death Hag, and you're all of a sudden at minus 15 melee attack in the presence of Morathi and that Death Hag. Well, wait, there's more. If you bring the Heartrender and Dark Sword, that is an additional 10 melee attack and defense. So now you're down like 25 melee attack in the presence of Morathi and a Death Hag. And you've lost 10 melee defense. This renders most units almost completely useless in the surrounding of Morathi. So it makes her very difficult to kill sometimes because she can just debuff the ever-living crap out of everything around her. And then if you're smart enough to keep her close to something like a Charybdis or some Blackguard, she is nigh untouchable. And so Morathi is really good in that regard. And then she gets an access to kind of a mix of shadow and death and dark magic. She still has Soul Stealer, which means she can do some healing. And then on top of that, she gets Pit of Shades from Shadows, and then also picks up Soul Blight and Doom and Darkness. So Morathi is really capable, really good Lord, and I like her in both multiplayer and campaign. I think she's excellent. And then we got Malekith. Malekith is also pretty supremely powerful because he's got a really good dragon mount here with Seraphon. He's very powerful on Seraphon. He's got access to dark magic, which has some decent spells in it. That's Soul Stealer, so he can heal a little. Doom Bolt is a good thing, you know, against a, what do you call it, like a single target, whether it's a unit or a single entity. Blade Wind is a good blob buster. Chill Wind is a good blob buster. So he's got lots of things at his disposal. In terms of specific abilities, Destroyer is pretty handy because when he gets close to you, it'll put a 15-second recharge. And it can make it where you can't use your key abilities for a few seconds when you're around Malekith, which can be quite handy. And then you've got this Circlet of Iron, which makes everybody more likely to miscast. Kind of sucks when you're a caster going up against him. And then a Hex on the Winds, which, again, proportional to the number of enemy units in range, it decreases enemy power reserves. So Malekith is pretty powerful, albeit pretty expensive to bring to a battle. That's the Druchii roster, folks. I did fail to mention, and I do want to go ahead and mention it real quick, their special kind of battlefield thing, which is called Murderous Prowess. And then I think there's a Murderous Mastery on certain units here too, yeah. It's kind of like the Martial Prowess and Martial Mastery for the High Elves, but it's different in the sense that this charges up and kicks on for a short time once the Druchii have either had a lot of dying or a lot of killing that's been done. And it's supposed to represent them kind of making Cain happy by filling up this meter of violence, right? And when they fill it up, you can see here this Martial Mastery. This is what happens when that meter fills up and goes off. They get extra leadership and melee attack for 120 seconds. Pretty significant. And then it's a lesser degree on units that just have the the Murderous Prowess, right? So it's slightly less of a bonus, and you can see it's only 90 seconds there. So yeah, anyway, another thing to mention about them. Their roster is very capable. I think the Druchii are in a good place from a roster standpoint. They can stand up to most factions because they have good monsters, they have good AP missiles, they have good infantry. Yeah, their cavalry is a little bit lacking, but it's there, and it's not bad. Their Lord options are many. I think the Druchii are in a great spot roster-wise, both for multiplayer and for campaign. In campaign, it would be nice to see a little bit of extra mechanics maybe brought to Malekith or Morathi at some point. Not 100% necessary, but it would certainly be nice. And then I'd like to see a rework to Malice. I think the Druchii are Game 3 ready. I don't really have a ton of worries about them. They'll probably get a few tweaks and additions throughout Game 3 as stuff comes out, and honestly, they're in pretty good shape. So I'm happy with where they're at. I think they're one of the funnest factions to play, and I enjoy them from both a campaign and a multiplayer standpoint. You all make sure and get down in the comments and tell me what you think. HeirofCarthage signing off for another State of the Faction video, and I'll be back with more soon. Hope you're enjoying them.